This is an old one. Well, not that old actually, but actually it's fairly recent, but it's one of my favorites. My parents really tried their best. Did you really? I was raised in a single-parent household, apartments really, and sometimes by my mother, occasionally by my aunt, but never by my father. In reality, most of the parenting I received was really my own self-generated moral compass. The concept of right or wrong has always come pretty easy to me. I've been pretty generous through the years at giving my mother and father a pass on all the things I deemed wrong with my childhood, and I've always been supportive and reassuring that I know she and he did their best, but with age comes wisdom, and as a father myself and now a grandfather, it's become increasingly more and more difficult to look the other direction. I mean, I'm not angry in the least, and I'm fully aware that their lives growing up were far from normal or ideal. They were dealt a heavy hand of trauma growing up, and as were my mother's siblings. That trauma followed her through life until even present day. She had my sister when she was 20 years old, I believe, and I followed a few years later as an appeasement for my father on some random night that they weren't fighting. Probably my mom's way of trying to get my father to stay home one night instead of going out to try and fuck some other chick. Their marriage was long over by this time. They both just failed to proceed to the next step. Inevitably it happened, and we were off to single-family apartments with an occasional weekend father. My mom and dad were basically still children themselves, and they still are for that matter. Having children is considered the toughest job on the planet, and it's only compounded when those children now have children of their own. They both threw in the towel and somehow figured it would be easier on their own. Not a ton of logic in their reasoning. I had several shitty father figures run through my life in my early years as a result of them running through my mother. I learned pretty quickly that none of them ever gave a shit about me. They were there to fuck my mom exclusively, including my father, and I was just a pawn in the equation. So sometimes they had to play nice with me, or take me fishing, and even buy me a quad to get to that golden ticket. One particular man came through twice, literally and figuratively. He went on to be considered the sperm donor of my two brothers. My older sister and I have the same father, and more on that to come. During the time periods of my life that no father figures were present, my aunt was in the picture. She also occasionally parented us on some level until she ultimately went on to have her own children that she could occasionally parent. She was with us on and off for most of my childhood, up until the age of 16, I believe. Having her around gave us all the security of having an actual adult around without there ever actually being an adult awake. She was a manic depressant and probably undiagnosed bipolar. It may have actually been more productive and safer to be raised by wolves, but as I alluded to earlier, I have had a strong moral compass, so the lack of parenting had no lasting effect. At some point during my childhood, my sister was traded to the other team. This was a significant blow to our House of Cards family structure, but who could blame her? She was faced with a serious challenge in her formidable years of leaving everyone she ever knew to go live on a farm that had no animals and grew nothing. The farm was utilized for hunting, and we had a regular crowd of hunters that paid to hunt these lands during the numerous seasons. This move happened as a result of my mother's bartending job. A customer who clearly liked my mom hired my mom and my aunt, like hospice nurses, to assist his mother to the other side. I had no idea that this was a skill set that they possessed, but with the trauma I had already been exposed to, it seemed perfectly normal to me. It seemed that this farm that grew nothing mostly peddled in death. My mother ultimately ended up in a short marriage with this man. I can't say that he ever taught me anything or that we ever shared a father-son moment, but he did buy me a quad, and that improved his ranking higher than all the rest of the father figures. I never lived with my actual dad, but knowing the things that my sister endured after the trade, it would seem like a tie. My father's household was stable and funded decently. My sister was now middle class, and I was proud of her achievement. She would never endure the shame of using food stamp, monopoly money, and WIC checks to get free milk, bread, and cereal. As a young teen, I can say that there is no more embarrassing situation than to be in the supermarket after school paying with food stamps, and the cashier is someone that you go to school with. Occasionally, I would pay with my own cash that I really couldn't afford to do in order to save the embarrassment of some girl that you might have a crush on ringing you out with this monopoly money. Although at the time I considered my sister's plight insignificant by comparison, my father's tactics were equally disturbing and impactful. He had anger issues and was the type, when he was angry, he would yell at you as though he was clearly trying to draw blood with his words, and occasionally he could succeed. But he would later gaslight you and act like you should be over this since he is, and he was the one with the reason to be angry. To this very day, the foul things that he will say in a fit of rage, only to be perfectly fine 20 minutes later, is nothing short of astonishing. His abuse was outright and in the open. The abuse I received was indirect and sometimes sold as an act of love from a person or persons who were trying their hardest to improve without ever making any changes. I mean, it seemed like one hell of a mountain to scale, and substance abuse played a role in both me and my sister's upbringing. She got it from both sides for a time. I only endured the kind of abuse that comes from alcoholism. My sister spent her early years trying to raise my mother and aunt and watch over me before the trade. My father is a pot smoker, and he smokes a lot of pot. He taught me and my sister and one brother how to drive with this tactic. He put us in a car with him and took a 2-hour drive with us at the wheel while he smoked what seemed like 10 joints. By the time the teaching session was over, we were contact high. In retrospect, it didn't seem like a good idea, but we were anxious to have our licenses, and people that would let you drive were rare, and my mom's car were out of the question. There's no way they were inspected or had insurance, and these were needed to be able to take the test. My sister saw the worst of what pot could do to a person. I mean, it's not as benign as all these pot activists would have you believe. She never did do any drugs, but she will drink Jack with the best of them, and I assume that comes from a place and or lessons learned. The same pass I've always given my mother, I'm actively giving my father, and he often gaslights with how terrible he was and what an asshole he can be. But I don't feel comfortable letting people feel terrible about themselves. It makes me feel terrible, so I'm forced to empathize and assure them of their contributions to our successes, even though I'm fully aware that there were no such contributions made. My sister and I are products of our own virtue. That's it. Thanks.